but I mean, compared to the last 8 months that we've seen, it's in the last 7 months, we've seen a reduction in inflation, and we'll capitalize on that and just try to maintain status quo.
Okay, great. So that means then there's no case to then lower the rates.
Yes, because of growth again. So, like I mentioned, I would expect an over exaggeration of the Q3 numbers that just came in at 4.03%. And comparing with other markets and what the experience is across SSA and even across the globe. And it comes to weighing that the intervention policies and other unorthodox policies that we've seen from the CBN is paying off gradually. And of course, they will try to just say, let's just maintain status quo and see how all of the policies take shape over the next couple of months. Because you agree with me that the MPC the CBN has been sort of unconventional, unorthodox policies, dabbling into agriculture, dabbling into energy, dabbling into, what happens with the CRW to the banking system, majorly affecting demand in a way in the market and also affecting supply. So that has sort of conjured rates currently. And, there may not be need for like I mentioned, the APR is just there as the symbolic rates. The rates will not follow, the rates in the markets will not follow what was happening with the NPR. So they'll just try to say, let's maintain status quo and keep all policy parameters constant.
Good stuff. We saw South Africa and Ghana. In fact, Ghana was just yesterday. South Africa, I think, was a few days ago, last week or so. I guess those are different markets. There's no reason to believe that we would follow suit with the two of them. They both hiked their rates.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's why we operate in the same region. We put African markets. We've seen that in the South African case, we saw a rate hike for the first time in 3 years, and that's because of rising inflation numbers in the economy. And of course, what has happened with protests and structural issues that have kept prices really high in the economy. So the government is trying to, regulate what happens with prices, and of course, still keep growth at a very healthy rate. So that's why we're seeing that rate, and that's like first time in 3 years. But it's just because of structural underlying issues and of course inflation numbers. In the case of the Ghanaian market, so that's like the first rate in 5 years, and that's because inflation rate has been consistently above the CBN, their central bank's benchmark rates for about 2-3 months now. The inflation rate has been above target. I mean, unlike in Nigerian markets where we are targeting 6 to 9%, but we are doing about 16% inflation numbers. These are markets that are very keen on what happens to inflation numbers because it translates to welfare. And of course, the policy measures directly affect what goes on in the economy in terms of lending and borrowing rates, So it is key for these markets that they tweak these rates because there is a pass-through effect to the economy. I mean, immediately these rates are adjusted. That's why you've seen that there's not been adjustment, there's not been any hike over time, except for the Ghanaian markets that sort of lowered rates by 250 basis points during the pandemic and over the course of time to steady things in the economy. So the hike is expected to translate into what happens in the economy and of course combat demand push inflation.
All right, great stuff. Speaking of inflation, I was reading an article, I think it was on the Punch or so, where they were speaking to one or two analysts who said they believe that inflation in Nigeria will pick up again in November and December. What do you make of that?
So, like I mentioned earlier, we've seen consistent slower pace of rise in prices over the last 7 months, and which analysts have argued that it's majorly a play of base effect. Last year, prices were rising very fast because of the pandemic, structural issues around supply of food and also other commodities. So that has sort of spiraled inflation, and the base effect is what is now lowering inflation currently. And of course, again, from July, we usually see the onset of harvest season, and this year we've seen lower flooding in some areas. Just the major insecurities that we've had. So that has kept inflation at bay. But again, I will agree with them because as we move to November, December, there's usually that festive induced demand, for food and other items. There's usually the November, December effect of rising prices in food, especially because of higher demand, people that would probably distribute or people that will buy to order to make sure that they don't participate in the higher prices. So people usually say, November, just do your shopping and all of that. And again, there's been a couple of things around the FX compared to what we had last year. There's been like an adjustment in FS compared to what we had last year, and this will also trickle down to this festive induced buying. So we may see headline inflation rising, although there is a bit of concern around core inflation as at the November and October numbers that came out. Some of the heavily weighted components of the core inflation were rising on a month-on-month basis, but core inflation was like lower. So there's a bit of concern around data integrity in that regards. But normally we should see higher numbers in terms of food inflation as we go into the end of the year, and even core numbers because of higher demand for energy products and all of that. The increased traveling that is associated with the festive period should trickle down to the headline numbers. But I mean, due to that data integrity issue that I mentioned, which we would not like to expatiate further, we may not see as much increase as we would expect in inflation numbers.
Okay. So can anything be done to address high food prices in Nigeria?
Yeah, of course, the food prices is the supply play majorly. Is the supply play. We have a very large economy, and any protectionism stance to try and say, oh, let's do this ourselves, let's produce this ourselves, cannot really work. You know, if you check the list of the banned items for FX, they are mostly staples. You know, you have maize, you have flour, you have wheat, you have maize, which are very, very important to food production. You know, wheat prices translates to flour, translates to bread, and you would agree with me that those prices are rising at a very fast rate now. So for instance, we need to free those items. We need them to be available for FX to be available for those items, because no matter what we do, even I read in an article that our locally produced wheat is not good for, is not let me say, is not suitable for the kind of flour that we consume. So we need to understand that we have a very large economy. We cannot produce everything ourselves. We need to open up the economy. Of course, the land borders have been opened, but they are not back to, you know, activities at those borders are not back to what we had pre the border closure in 2019. So this will continue to trickle down to prices. We just need to adjust what we have in terms of supply, because demand will always be very high.
Great stuff. And can we just think about our pockets when it comes to inflation? What about real rate of return for investment?
So for a long period now, say since like 2019, when we had that issues with the CBN bifurcating the market, the real rate of return has been negative. I mean, checking across the yields this morning, the longest tenor instrument is like doing a 13.2% rate, and inflation is at 16.9. That's some 3% negative real income for investors, and that's like fixed income. When you now even come to the equities markets, where returns are even much sort of lower, except for some instruments, you see that the real return for investors is lower. What this means is that, you know, the purchasing power of your money that you're investing now is being eroded, I mean, over time. So we can't just think about food. Of course, food is important. Food is like the major item in the consumer baskets in Nigeria, taking over like 50% of spending in households. But again, in terms of investments, it also means that we are getting lower in terms of the real return that we're getting. That means we're eroding the capital that we're even investing in some of these markets because of this, you know, consistently higher inflation numbers.
And it sounds like, is it correct for me to still want to say that structural issues are what I guess need to be addressed to bring down inflation in Nigeria?
Yes, that's very correct. Like I mentioned, is a supply plea. So the moment that we have enough, you know, when there's competition, there's always that consumer protection. You know, consumers are well off when there's competition. If food in Vietnam, if rice in Vietnam can come in at 13,000, that's with all the custom duties. Why are we buying rice for 30,000 naira in the Nigerian market? You know, so the supply can be adjusted. If we can have enough supply, if all of these staples that are included in the importation ban list can be, you know, be allowed to have access FX at the official rates, then we'll be better off in terms of food. And you know, whatever happens to food prices automatically affects headline inflation. Food inflation is still at 20%, which is very, 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 very high compared to what other markets are doing, despite even the effect of the pandemic and, you know, the supply chain disruptions that have happened in so many markets. We are still like top of the league when it comes to food inflation. So if this supply can be adjusted, yes, that's a structural issue, and we can see improvements in, you know, the economy. Again, they are mulling sort of subsidy removal in 2022, and then there will now be a transport allowance, which, I mean, for lack of a better word, does not really make much economic sense. How do you want to measure what happens to transport allowance? How do you measure who gets what? We'll still go back to the subsidy play, where some people were like fraudulent with the subsidy allowance. Yeah.
Great stuff. Finally, do you expect any other drama outside of normal MPC matters? Last time we had the whole FX thing. Do you think anything else to be addressed today?
Yeah, so I mean, last meeting in September was very epic in the drama around KFX, treating cancer source instead of treating, the source of the cancer itself, and Abuki FX is out of the picture now. And like I mentioned, FX is a very comfortable state. I would expect I wouldn't expect so much drama like we had last time. Abuki FX is out of the picture. The change are not really operational, and then we've seen improvements in reserves. CBN has a leg room to intervene in the market, so I expect a lot of hype around what the CBN is doing for the intervention, for food, a lot of hype around what is happening to the reserves, which of course we know is driven by higher oil prices, and of course the interventions that we recently got, the Eurobond, and of course the SDR facility. But I wouldn't expect drama. What I would expect is the MPC lauding the efforts of the CBN in combating inflation, in boosting growth, in boosting the FX reserves, and was trying to just maintain. And of course, the unconventional measures will continue. The tightening of the banking system liquidity through the constant CRR debits will just continue. And when these efforts are lauded, it's just going to be sustained. And this is the last meeting for the year, so we're still going on this period to maybe January 2022. Yeah.
Great stuff. Great stuff. Really appreciate the insight there. Again, Oluwadara, Olunuga, investment analyst with ARM Securities. Appreciate it. Judith, go ahead.
Yeah, we have a message here from Yinka, and it goes, data integrity. That was a subliminal jab at MBS back there. However, I couldn't agree more ever since Yemi Kale left that office. And it goes on to say, did I hear they want to start giving us a transport allowance? That's from Yinka there. Guys, thank you so much for joining.
It's a consideration to cushion the blow of subsidies if you take it off. It's a consideration up in the air. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Rotus, and thank you so much. Thank you, and thank you to Oluwadara. That this brings us to Dara. I beg your pardon, Oluwadara. This brings us to the very end of Business Express 981, brought to you by ARM Securities. Stick around. Coming up at 7:30 is going to be time for Freshly Pressed 981. Stay with us.
Thanks, Dara. Take it easy.
Thanks, Rotus. Have a great day. Bye.